So we're going live now, and yes, I think we are live. Yes, we're live. I'm here with Christopher. How you doing, Christopher?
Hi.
Nice to meet you. Finally, I've been reading your comments, very thoughtful comments, and on my YouTube channel, and you seem like an interesting guy, nice guy, and you got really cool hair. So not to put you on the spot, but so would you like to take us back to your earliest memories of God and religion and talk us through the usual? You've been watching some of my interviews, so you know how it works, right? So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to start by saying thank you. I've benefited from all the work that you do in your podcasts and interviewing different people. Um, it's one of my favorite YouTube channels these days. So,
Wow, thank you very much. It means a lot.
yeah. Um, I grew up in the Nazarene church,
Okay.
which I don't, are you familiar with that church?
No, I pass by one every day when I'm biking to work, but I have no idea what it is.
Okay. It's and I'm not sure I know tons, I don't know necessarily lots about it,
Okay.
but it's a holiness church that came from the Wesleyan tradition.
Okay.
Um, so John Wesley and his brother and the people involved with that who were I think they were I'm just learning about this recently, like Church of England, but then, Methodist broke off from there. Um, and then the Nazarene Church started, I think, in the early 1900s as like a joining of different groups with some Pentecostal background, and then probably some that weren't. But the expression I grew up with in wasn't a Pentecostal church when I went there, but there were some echoes of it in the church. Um, so that was a pretty standard evangelical, fairly traditional church. I was born in the late 70s, and so part of my growing up kind of morphed, my church experience kind of morphed from like dressing up in hymns to more casual and chorus singing, that type of thing. And most of the churches I went to were pretty small, less than 50, 60 people.
Cool.
Um, and so I went to that church my entire life. Um, so that was like my religious background. My family was at church all the time. And for me, I would say like I believed in God as an idea, kind of like a worldview, like very much in my head. But then as I got older, um, started to slip into sins and felt bad about it. And it was secret and kind of rebellion in my teenage years, not wanting to listen to my parents. And also my goals in life at that time were to, I was really into computers. I still am, but was to like become a famous like computer scientist and get as much money as I could so that I could own a yacht and just buy whatever I wanted. So that was kind of like my dream at that time. Um, and we would have summer camps, youth camps with our church that I would go to most summers. And those experiences for me were very much like you would have a preacher give a sermon telling you you should commit your whole life to God. And then they would ask teens to do that, to commit their whole lives to God. And I might do that some of the summers, feel some inspiration, but then after like a week it would fade away and I'd be back to my normal life. Um and so that was kind of the extent of my religious experience. I was baptized when I was 12. I can't remember like all what went into my thinking with that. Other kids I think were being baptized. I'm sure it was something I agreed with and I wanted to do, but it wasn't super meaningful, that experience for me. And so when I was 16 years old, I went to one of those summer camps, and we had a speaker there, a guy named Mick, and he told us his story, and it was different than other speakers we had had. So he grew up in kind of an unchurched house and was invited to go to a summer camp when he was a teenager, and he heard there would be sports and girls, and so he decided to go. And he met Jesus there at that camp, and his whole life was just turned upside down. And then he told the story of like what happened afterwards, being a part of this community of these teens who were just on fire for Jesus and reaching out to their community. And he kind of really went into like what that looked like in detail. So it was more of a full picture than I'd ever heard or seen. And then he invited, the youth at that camp to commit their lives to Jesus. And like the Holy Spirit was there kind of extending that offer to me, like, you have the opportunity, you can do this. And I said yes. And my whole life totally changed. So it was more than just like an emotional experience in that moment, but it was like that the presence of God was there, that Jesus was there, someone I didn't recognize before that I could even communicate with or connect to was suddenly there and very real. And like what's described in scripture, like the fruit of the Spirit, just like filled my life. I wanted to respect my parents, treat my siblings kindly. I wasn't interested in getting the biggest yacht I could. I just wanted to serve God, love him, love other people. The scriptures came alive for me. Before then, they were kind of dry and boring. But now, like, I found in them my experience and what was happening to me. And so, then it was that process of cultivating that relationship over the next, few years with ups and downs. There were other teens from my city that went to that camp. And as we were driving back home, we're like, okay, what do we do now? And so we decided let's give God our best time. Let's give him our Friday nights and get together and have a Bible study and just connect with each other and pray for each other. We asked our pastor if he wanted to lead it, and he said, nope, just you guys can do that. And so we did, and it was like an amazing time of getting together every week. So that's been the most like transformative time in my life. And that's kind of where things got started in my relationship with God. It hasn't been like always so smooth and wonderful the rest of these, many years after that. In fact, in some ways, I would say, like, I feel like I'm in kind of in a prodigal son state, and have been in the desert for many years. But still that is the most like meaningful, impactful moment of my life.
What about parents and siblings? Can you just sort of describe roughly like how they reacted to your journey and what their journey was like without, betraying any confidences or anything? But sometimes I don't know even if you have siblings, but sometimes siblings go off on a bad path and just end up being atheist or whatever. Not that I'm judging these people's hearts, but I was atheist for 25 years. So but it's just interesting to sort of see the context of your family and even grandparents and friends and family. What was the sort of vibe and what were the different trajectories? Any interesting stories in there that are worth sharing?
Well, my brother is 8 years younger than me.
Okay.
So I was 16. He was an 8-year-old when this happened. And he has said like he noticed a change back then.
Yeah.
My sister is 3 years younger than me, but there's three of us in our family.
Okay.
And her and I would talk, about these things and sing music together at home, or, like write each other like notes of encouragement.
Mhm.
Um, my parents, I'm not sure that we talked about it a lot. I mean, they were aware of obviously what was going on. And I think that it was a positive thing from their perspective.
And they're strong in the faith today, your parents and siblings, or
Yeah.
and pretty much the same denomination or whatever you call it. Is that right, or does that not matter?
My parents are in that same denomination. Um, but my brother and my sister, their families, they're no longer part of that denomination.
Oh, okay, it's something radically different, or how do you see that?
No, fairly similar.
Oh, okay. And were there any Catholics? Did you know about Catholics? Or were you anti-Catholic at any time, or?
Um, so I struggle with what that term means. It's like, because it could mean such radically
Yeah,
different
yeah,
things.
yeah.
Um, so I wouldn't say that we were anti-Catholic. Like, we would be open to having Catholic friends. I think my dad had a Catholic friend in his adult years. We didn't have a lot of Catholic friends though. And so I never really had like deep conversations with Catholics about their faith. Um, I would say that there was a certain, how do I describe this? There was a certain perspective about who Catholics were that was presented in my family and probably in our church a little bit, that did color my perspective growing up. And that was in Catholics and kind of Lutherans and other like liturgical uh, groups would have fit into this bias, I would say. So I wouldn't say it was anti-Catholic, but I would say there was a little bit of a bias that that is kind of like a dead religious practice.
Yeah.
That if you were Catholic, you weren't really serious.
Yeah.
You were just kind of going through the motions.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty typical, and that's right on the money, I would say, for a lot of Catholics. Sadly, the diagnosis is on point because, it is easy. There's a saying in the Catholic Church that religion is for those who lack faith, right? It's just
Mm.
it's just it's just easier to go through the motions, and we see Jesus chastising the Jews of his day for doing just that. It's easy. It's just easier to go through the motions, and when you have an apostolic church like we have, and the Eastern Orthodox, and used to be the case with the Anglicans and Lutherans too, but they've strayed very far. Um, you have ritual, you have liturgy, you have set prayers, you have a lot of things where you can literally check the box. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. And I talk about this all the time on my podcast. You may have heard me talking about this, complaining about this, how I fall into that check box kind of thing, because it is an important part of the faith, but it's dead without love, and without being connected to God and having that relationship like the Protestants always talk about. It's the most important thing, and so it is a temptation. It is easy, and I guess that's one of the challenging parts about being a Catholic, is to rest on your laurels and to get complacent, to go through the motions and check off the check boxes. And I do keep track. Like, I mean, I have a spiritual journal, and I keep track of what I'm doing. Like, I keep track of all this stuff because it is important to me and I want to do it. But I want to do it with quality, not just quantity. I want the quality, and all the saints talk about this, how just do the little things with love, and that's more than doing 1,000 things mindlessly. Like, it's actually a damnable sin, to do things that are supposed to be for God, and you're not even thinking about God. You're thinking about your next meal or whatever it is. So idolatry is so easy to fall into for Catholics. I don't know about Protestants, but for Catholics, idolatry is very easy to fall into because we have so many things to turn into idols. Now, it's a controversial stance for me to take or to admit, but it's just reality, and the saints even talk about this, how it's an inner struggle, and it's a striving. We're striving for holiness, and we're striving to have that relationship, to maintain that relationship. And I always think about it, I always describe it in terms of a romantic relationship. It's a complete self-giving, and it leaves you vulnerable, and it requires effort, and it's not always fun.
Yep.
So, I admire the non-Catholic Christians, the Protestants. I clump you all together as Protestants. Those who aren't Eastern Orthodox or Catholic, I just clump you all together just for shorthand, and that includes non-denominational and everyone else. But I do admire that, the laser focus on the relationship with Christ, and the laser focus on the scriptures and all these sorts of things. And they're valuable parts of my faith that can, fall by the wayside a little bit. So
Yeah, I think it's it's not so simple and easy as perhaps that my church made it out to be. That if you're Catholic or Lutheran, you're likely just going through the motions.
yeah.
But I think there's also, in the evangelical church, you can be going through the emotions, and it's very much about
Yeah.
like the surface. I need to appear to be happy, or I should be joyful, therefore I'm going to act joyful,
Okay.
and that the relation, like you said, with a romantic relationship, it is a complicated, it is a complicated thing. Our actions matter, our consistency matters, our purpose matters. And doing the same things over and over isn't necessarily empty,
Yeah.
you know.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure, for
But it
sure.
is that foundation of how is that relationship. And I don't think being in the Protestant or evangelical church is just some sort of magic solution for that.
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
yeah.
it's just as big of an issue, I think.
Yeah, yeah, you have to work at it and be mindful and attentive, and it's an act of the will. Love is an act of the will, and so that requires a certain amount of commitment and energy and these sorts of things. You haven't talked about your wife. How did you meet her? What's her faith journey? Just talk about it, obviously, in terms that are not gonna. She's not gonna be angry when you're talking about her. But how'd you meet her? How'd you fall in love? How did you know she was the one, and vice versa, and all these sorts of stuff? I would like hearing about that.
So her story is different than mine. Her family are Cambodian immigrants
Oh, no way.
to Minnesota, which is
Oh,
where we
wow.
live.
Oh,
So I grew up in California until I was 12. Then we moved to Minnesota, went to this Nazarene church.
oh,
The Nazarene church had a ministry to Cambodian immigrants.
oh,
And so they had an English speaking congregation and a Cambodian speaking congregation. Her parents were Buddhists,
oh, wow.
nominal. Her father was actually raised by Buddhist monks.
Are they ethnically Cambodian or ethnically Chinese in Cambodia, or what was the deal there?
Both.
Okay.
So like I think her parents maybe like a quarter Chinese.
Okay. Okay, because I know there are a lot of Chinese in
Yep.
Cambodia.
Yep.
Nice
So
people, though. Very nice people.
yeah. Yeah. So they're like definitely have that Chinese influence in her family.
Mm.
But they're not mostly Chinese. So they came here in the late 70s. Her grandma got involved with that church pretty early on. So she was the first Christian in their family
Wow.
for the longest time, the only adult Christian.
Wow.
And so she would pay her grandchildren to go to church every Sunday.
That's a good trick. We should use that.
And yeah, why not? Instead of donating money at the church pays you to go.
Yeah.
Um, so that's where my wife Julie, that's how she got involved with the church, and she kept going even though she wasn't paid. So it became like a meaningful part of her life, and she became a Christian. And so we met in the youth group at that church.
Wow. Wow.
And we were friends for a bunch of years. I was dating someone else. I knew she liked me and I wasn't interested. And so it wasn't until later in college I actually had a dream in college that I married her
Wow.
when I wasn't interested.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
So it
just
was just
sounding
like
very
this.
familiar. It's sounding very familiar because my wife was pursuing me and I was like pushing her away in university. But then I had a dream where I had to either kiss her, which meant I'm in, or
Mm,
not, and then it's over. And then so the next, in my dream, I was walking through this field I'd never been in before, and the next day was Canada Day, and we're walking through the same field I dreamt about. I'd never seen it before. And I
wow.
stopped and I looked at her and I didn't kiss her, but I committed to her. I said, wow, I just sort of, I just let my heart was open at that moment. So it's ringing a lot of bells. Your story is very touching.
Yeah, it was just like a vignette of us on stage getting married,
Okay.
and where we actually did get married at our home church. I told my roommate the next morning, I was like, hey, man, I had a weird dream because we were at the same college. We saw each other. We were friends. We talked about the
She was
different
stalking
people.
you. Just be honest. She was stalking you for years, right?
Well, no, she wasn't. She'd gotten over me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we would talk together about who we were interested in.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So all the pressure was off, and then you realized, wow.
Well, so I had this dream. I told my roommate, I was like, I had a weird dream that I married Julie, and he knew her, so it was a few years later, I graduated from college. I started thinking about what kind of a woman would I like to get married to. And she checked a lot of those boxes. And I started to think, that Julie gal, she's kind of interesting. So I asked, no, she emailed me. She said, do you want to hang out? I'm home for the summer. I said, sure. Um, she was dating a guy, and I'm trying to remember, were they engaged or close to engaged? It was very serious. But we hung out that summer, and I found out they weren't dating anymore. And so then I professed my undying love for her,
Wow.
and she turned me down. She said,
Ah!
she said, no, not right now.
Oh.
So then she went back off to school. She's a few years younger than me and finished her schooling. We didn't keep in super close contact. It
It
wasn't
was
until like
awkward. Was it awkward?
um so I had been praying about whether or not to tell her that I liked her. And I was reading through Proverbs, and there's a proverb that says that, like, basically you can cast the die, but the result is in the Lord's hand. And so I took that as like I could tell her, but all the results have to be in God's hand. So I told her, and she didn't say that she reciprocated. And so I was telling my friends and my brother, and they're like, "Oh, bummer, man." And I was like, "I'm not sure the die have come to rest." But, after time, eventually you have to move on and give up. And so it wasn't until like a year and a half later where she came to visit my sister, and I was living with my sister. And it was awkward because I was like, we hadn't seen each other or talked to each other. I was like, how do I treat her? I was like, well, the scriptures say to treat her like a sister. And so I will just treat her like I would treat my sister and not let it be awkward. So I think we were cooking in the kitchen. I like rubbed butter on her face. So I don't know how she took all that, if she took it as flirting or whatever, but it was in the course of her hanging out there that she finally was like, I think I like this Christopher fellow.
Wow.
So then we talked about like, should we date? She taught English in China for a couple years.
Oh.
So she was home for the summer, and then she was going back to China, and we're like, let's not date. You're about to leave the country, you know. She left to go to China. We prayed about it more, and then we decided, yes, let's make it official. Our first date was in China. I went out to visit her 6 months later. Um,
Wow.
and then we got married shortly after she came home from China.
Wow. How did her family like you? They like you?
Yeah, we'd known them for years.
Yeah. No problem.
So, yeah. and I love her family.
Yeah.
I've found, definitely a good home with them and in their family.
Nice. So how long you been married now?
17 years, I think.
Wow. Wow, that's
Yeah.
pretty good. And what
And we
about
have
the
4 kids.
four kids? Okay. Pretty
Yeah.
cool. Wow. Amazing. That's an amazing story. I love hearing these romantic love stories. There is, I don't understand how atheists, first of all, don't believe in God, but I mean, I also don't understand how they don't believe in the mystery and the magic of love, because for them it's just a biochemical configuration in the brain and whatever. And that's sad, that's really sad. There's no magic, there's no mystery. And I know it's not magic what we're experiencing here. It's like, we have God, and we have the supernatural, and we have love, which is not just a bunch of chemicals circulating in this sack of meat here.
Hmm.
It's infinitely better. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's infinitely better to understand what love is, and to know what love is, and to have that. It's, and there is a faith component to our romantic relationships. Like, I mean, there's so much that's why they call it it's a leap. Like, we describe love in that way too, right? And if you know any commitment phobes, usually it's men who are shy to commit to women. I admit I was shy with my wife. She had to pursue me, and finally I gave in. I had my mystical dream and whatever. And it sounds like you had a little bit of that. Maybe Julie had a little bit of that. But some guys have a chronic case of commitment phobia, and you do have to be like a little child in a certain sense. You have to be innocent. You have to be open. You have to be open to risk, and it's an adventure, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous. You know how dangerous a woman can be, because you have your opinions, she has her opinions, and there are battles. Like, there are battles over the stupidest little things in a marriage, right? So, and then once you have kids, I can't really speak to that. I don't have any children, sadly, but I mean, I'm sure that increases the complexity. Maybe it increases the bonding too. So there's less, maybe, there's less danger of splitting. I don't know, once you have kids, if that helps the bond or no.
Um, well, not necessarily. We've been close to splitting in
Yeah.
our marriage,
Yeah.
probably about 7 years ago.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to just get involved with the workings of life and raising kids, and you lose sight of the relationship,
Okay.
and the hurts build up and the disappointments build up. And um, and people obviously get divorced with kids. So,
Sad, sad but true. I mean, what's the divorce rate in North America? Like 50% or something?
yeah, yeah. I
It's
mean, it's,
it's pretty tragic. That's one of the most tragic things. And I've read, years ago, I just stumbled upon some, I don't know, pop magazine or something talking about stress, and they listed the number one stress as divorce. Above death of a loved one, above everything, it was divorce. That was the number one stress. And people that I know that are divorced, most of them, not all of them, but most of them do regret it. Like, they, not to say that they believe it could have worked if they stayed together, but they obviously wish it would have worked. Like, no one wants that tragedy and
yeah.
that hot mess. And not to be too cynical, but sometimes people think also about the financial part of it is not fun either. Like, financially for some people, right? That's more of a superficial pain, but it's part of the pain, I guess.
Well, yeah. And being terrible at things is a good humbling experience. I've been, I've been a terrible husband, and I've been a terrible father. I've been a terrible Christian. Like, I have a lot more sympathy for people who get divorced
Yeah.
or wreck their kids' lives. I feel like that's more easy to do than the opposite.
How old's your youngest now?
Our youngest is 10.
Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
So
and our oldest is 16.
I was skipping rocks on the St. Lawrence River with a 11-year-old kid today because we went biking out to there's a beach. You're not going to be impressed by this beach. It's just stony beach. It's tiny, but there's this cute little guy there with long hair, this little kid, and he was skipping stones. I was showing him tricks and stuff like that. But that's pretty cute. Age 10. So the oldest is how old?
16.
Oh yeah, 10 to 16. He said that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So they're going through life in the 21st century. That can't be easy. That cannot be easy, especially with what we went through the past 3 years. That must have been pretty traumatic. I know people that have kids that are young, very young, and the whole masking thing really messed them up in terms of communication and socialization and stuff like that. And it's hard, it's hard to prove and to make the connection and to prove that it's caused by that or whatever, but I think it's a pretty basic part of our human nature to read faces. I've been part of psychological studies at the university here. Back in the day, I would just do it they would just give you a little bit of money, just do it as a part-time thing. And there were interesting studies about the brain and, the mind and psychology and stuff like that. And one of the studies talked about the way that we scan faces, the way that our eyes look at faces, and it's a constant scanning all around. It's not like you're just looking at the eyes, and you're not just looking at the nose or the mouth or whatever. It's like it's going all over the place, and there's a lot of processing going on, and even the facial recognition is so amazing. That you can distinguish twins, like identical twins. You can distinguish so many faces. It's quite a powerful thing. So I think to block that is hampering the development. Let's just put it that way, or potentially hampering the development. It's very delicate stuff, I think.
Yeah, hopefully those kids have some people at home that they're able to see the faces at home.
We would hope, yeah, we would like to think that, yeah. I
Yeah.
still see masked people here, and this is not to put down anyone who believes the hype or whatever. I don't, but anyone who believes it, whatever. I love and respect you, whatever. But I still see people here masking up, and maybe they're vulnerable, maybe their immune system isn't so great or whatever. But I don't want to judge anyone, but I don't like it. I certainly don't like it. And you said you lived in Asia, or you visited Asia at least, and you must have seen a lot of that.
Yeah, actually during SARS.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I left to come home, I was feeling sick. So who knows what I got. Actually, both Julie and I got sick when we were in Beijing together. So I was worried when I went through the airport and they scanned the foreheads, for the temperature.
Yeah.
But I was okay and I got to go home.
Okay. Did you get really sick over the past 3 years, or?
I think I've had COVID twice.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It was all right though. You survived.
I did survive. It was, it was real. Like
Yeah.
I felt like super drained of energy.
Yeah.
It wasn't nothing.
Yeah. Worse than the flus you've had.
On the energy side of things.
Okay.
But also I got the lighter one. Was it Omicron? That was the one that everybody got.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if I got it, but I was really sick in March 2020. When did it first? Was it 2020 or? Yeah, I think it was 2020, right? March.
Yeah.
Yeah, March of 2020. I got it. I got something. It was like devastating. And then Christmas of I guess 2021, like a year later or whatever. But yeah, those were pretty bad. But it's funny. This year, I was just talking to my wife today when we were biking around, and it's like we didn't get sick all winter. It's like so I think, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but I think our immune system sort of got a little bit of a workout, and maybe it's just coincidence. I don't know, but or maybe there's just not as much stuff going around now. But usually, my whole life, usually I get sick twice a year, and the sickness leading up to winter is bad, but the one after winter is horrible. It's always the worst one for me. I don't know if that's unique to me, or if you have have you ever had a spring cold flu thing? It's worse for me. I don't know, but for you.
No, my health's usually been pretty I've
Pretty
had
good.
to deal with lots of that.
Okay.
I was a
Okay.
teacher for a few years, and I did get more sick when I was a
Uh,
teacher.
yeah.
So,
Well, I was getting sick all the time because I was riding public transportation, and since I've stopped that. It's really
yep,
helped. It really helped. But
yep,
I hate being sick. Every time I get sick, I think I'm gonna die. Like this is the rest of my life is just gonna be hell on earth, and very dramatic. And here in
yep,
Quebec, they call it grip dumb. That means a cold, a man's cold, because the men complain a lot. Like they're not tough.
yep.
Women are better at that. So, what's happening now? Like with you said you were sort of not as on fire as you were in your late teens or whatever. I converted well, I was Protestant until age 14, lost my faith, and then I was atheist for 25 years. And I came back and I was on fire, obviously, like for a good 10, 11 years. And with all the COVID and everything and shutting down the churches, and I didn't have access to my sacraments and stuff like that, things really have been rough and it hasn't
Mm,
been great. It's been a dark period for me. And, I'm not where I should be in terms of my walk with God and stuff like that. But I keep striving and I keep trying, but I just know the quality isn't there like it was and like it should be. And hopefully I'll get back. So all of this just to say that I sympathize like with the ups and downs of our walk with God. But what are you doing like proactively? Are you just like reading the Bible? Are you going to church, or what are you doing to try to get out of? If you're in a little mini slump or something, what are you
mm.
doing for that?
Well, for me, I don't think a mini slump. I think it's a maxi slump.
Okay.
Um, well, for us, so the story is kind of, I don't know which parts we want to delve into. There's probably a couple parts that we could go
Yeah. Deep.
fairly deep in.
Okay.
One is that a few years back, maybe I don't know how many years ago it was, I started to wonder about this whole what is church?
Okay.
Started to kind of ask that question.
Mm.
So that kind of led us down the path of re-examining that maybe for the first time,
Ah.
and leaving kind of a regular church expression and like doing house church things.
Oh.
Um, so, and that's, I don't know, it's difficult to do that, to find people on the same page with you, or,
What about those kids from your teenage years who used to get together on Friday nights? They're all over the country now.
well, I mean, that was a big part of the inspiration once we
Yeah.
started asking that
Yeah.
question, to look back on that experience
Yeah.
and see like how that aligned with the scriptures,
Okay.
you know, and we just to read the scriptures fresh again.
Yeah.
And so but they were in different places, they weren't in the same area. But that's kind of what we were aiming for, is that type of experience. Um, we really, we would go to church week in and week out, kind of a smaller church. So we knew everybody, but we didn't really know where people were at. Someone could be going through a really dark time or a
Mm.
struggle or a sin,
Yeah.
and be really, or almost on the verge of divorce. And you might not necessarily know that they were going through that. And as we read through the scriptures and read about this picture of the body, of parts being connected to each other and caring for each other, and that you couldn't disregard a part, and that you were to pray for each other so regularly, and bear each other's burdens and love each other practically. For us, that required like a deeper connection, like what I used to have on those Friday nights. So we started kind of pursuing that path, and trying to find that kind of expression where, that if we were in a gathering, you and I,
Yeah.
you know, that I would know, like, how is David doing, and you would know, how is Christopher doing, and we'd know how to pray for each other and encourage each other in our walk, that we weren't just two separate people just following Jesus on these separate
Or
paths.
being polite, superficially polite and formal, like, hi, how are you? Nice day. See you next week, kind of thing. like happens at a lot of churches.
Yeah, yeah. Your audio's kind of fuzzy right now. I don't know what's going
Okay,
on.
it might be my microphone. It might be. It seems to be showing up on my meter, so it might just be on your end. I'll just
Okay, it
adjust.
could be.
I'll
I could
just
try.
adjust the placement.
I'll put in some headphones.
Okay, go for it. Can you hear me now? Does it sound a bit better now? Check, check, check. I still hear myself going through the speakers though, so you have to switch it probably to headphones. Can you hear me? Is it coming through your headphones now?
Okay, that's better.
That sounds better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
it's showing up on my meter, so I think it's good. But I was hearing myself echoing when I was on speaker with you before, so now this probably sounds better.
Okay. Yeah, it's a different speakers. It's not actually through the headphones, I don't think, but as long as it's not echoing.
Okay, so you can still now you can hear me properly.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. So my I just have a quick question from my live chat. My friend Daniel Drazinovich says, "What exactly was the change that your brother saw when you were 16?" Because you mentioned offhand that he noticed the change, but I'm guessing he just noticed that you're more friendly and more polite and more loving and all that, right?
Yeah, I probably picked on him less. And I enjoyed picking on him when he was a little kid,
Oh,
pulling pranks on him. Um, yeah, so I'm guessing I was just more kind and gentle with him in general.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, like he didn't notice you levitating and speaking in tongues or something like weird like that, right?
Nope, nope.
Do you do tongues?
No.
Okay, that's not part of your community, the general.
In some small areas.
Okay, you're comfortable with it
Um,
or you're uncomfortable with that?
I would say uncomfortable.
Yeah.
My girlfriend in high school said she, like spoke in tongues, and that was kind of weird for me. Um, and then I visited Pentecostal church one time or two times with family members. Um, so that's still in the category of like I read it in the Bible.
Yeah.
So I don't want to like totally be closed off to it.
Yeah.
Um, but also, it feels like I see so many like bad expressions of it
Yeah.
that I'm not sure. But a bad expression of something does not negate the
Of
validity of
course. Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course,
So,
of course, of course. Yeah, I think it's real. All the gifts are real, but people like to fake the gifts, all of the gifts. They fake all of the gifts. Um, People fake charity. People fake charity. It's like so, everything can be mocked and mimicked, and Satan loves doing that. Satan loves mocking the church, mocking Christ, and being a poor martyr, and a victim, and couldn't this money have been given to the poor, as Judas said? It's like, Satan's really, really good at that. The crocodile tears.
right.
And this is not to say that if you're, part of some wacky Christian cult and you're doing all kinds of wacky demonic stuff, that that you're participating in evil, that you're a servant of Satan. You don't necessarily know it. You might be an innocent victim, but that does
Mm.
definitely happen. I mean, Satan's having a lot of fun with Christians more than with anyone else, because he's not really interested in in anything but God and Jesus Christ and Christ's church and Christ's sheep. That's his main target, obviously. The
Mm.
people that he's already got guaranteed, like he's got their souls and that those souls are going to hell. He's not toying with them. They're if anything, he's spoiling them with gifts, God's gifts. They're not his gifts, they're God's gifts, but give them money, give them pleasure, all this stuff, and then ha ha ha, joke's on you because I've got your soul for all eternity. So yeah, it's the Christians that Satan wants. And since we're speaking of Satan, the prince of this world, did you have direct demonic experience where you realized that, above and beyond all the nuances of this denomination's creed and all the fancy textbook stuff, theology. Beyond all of that, you have a soul. It's up for grabs. Satan wants it, and he's tempting you. He's playing with you, and maybe even attacking you. Have you had dark experiences like that, or have you seen, or maybe you've seen it in other people around you that made it
Yeah, I think
real, that made the spiritual battle very, very real for you?
yeah, I mean, I think I've seen it in others, um, and sensed it summon myself as well. Um, there's been some, some pretty dark times.
Well, the funny thing about COVID, I'm not really allowed to talk about on YouTube because I get my channel deleted all the time. But the funny thing about it is that Satan sort of overplayed his hand a little bit, and now some people that didn't necessarily believe in God are starting to think, well, I know Satan's real, so God must be real, and these sorts
Mm.
of things. Like this is part of the economy of salvation, and God allows evil, He permits evil, and there are limits on how much evil can be done. Um, but it all is for God's greater glory, and it's for our salvation. And it's all an opportunity. Even the suffering, it's an opportunity for us to, like you were saying, to be humbled. By your own weakness, and so you're glorifying God in your weakness if you're humble enough to see reality, to be sane, and not to live in a fantasy world where you where you're perfect, where you're basically God yourself. And that is, I mean, ultimately, I guess that is ultimately the danger, and humility and pride. Um, they're very often easy to distinguish, but ultimately, that is the challenge day to day in the inner life, is to try you know, to not be fooled into thinking
Mm.
that your pride is something other than pride. Like that's that's a big challenge for Christians. It's a very, very big challenge for Christians.
Yeah, it's difficult to admit when we're missing the mark. Like I want to think of myself as good. I want other people to think of me as good. Like, and it's hard to get past that to how things actually are.
For sure, but Saint Augustine says that we have to, the difficulty of what he actually said in this quote that I'm thinking of now is that Satan likes to disguise himself as an angel of light, as it says in the scriptures, and it's almost impossible to figure that out sometimes,
Mm.
to recognize Satan when he's masquerading as an angel of light. But the upside of that, St. Augustine says, the positive side of that, the silver lining of that fact is that it forces us to put our faith in God and in God alone. So we're not going to put our faith in the preacher or the priest that we thought was, perfect and squeaky clean, and then we find out, oops, not so much. So we're prepared, we're always prepared. Not that we think the worst of people. No, we don't think the worst of people. We try to think the best of people, but we're prepared. We already know that our preacher, our favorite pastor, or even our spouse or whatever is not God, and there's an infinite gap there. So that keeps us that keeps us um, you know shock proof. So we're not going to get discombobulated when we realize that people are people, right?
Yeah, and ourselves included, I think it's easy to think like I'm doing well as a Christian, like I'm
Yeah,
very pious and committed, and
yeah,
like it's easy to kind of then put your faith in yourself, you know, as being an amazing Christian.
for
Um,
sure. Well, you said there are a couple of little rabbit holes we can go to, so I want to get to them. But before we do that, I was just curious, because you've been sort of hopping around on my YouTube and looking at some videos and listening to some of my older stuff, and some atheists, some Catholics, some Protestants, whatever, and some pretty strange people, frankly, that have come on my show. And I'm just curious, what are the highlights? Like, have you been touched by the story of this person or that person? And of course, you don't have to remember their name or the episode or whatever, but do you remember being touched, and what have you learned, and what is it about hearing people's stories that inspires you? And is it only the good, or is it the bad, and everything in between, or what is it?
Uh, the good, the bad, everything in between. So
Yeah,
it's it's informative and interesting just to hear everybody's story,
yeah,
like wherever they're at. Obviously there could be some stories that are just so dark that I may not get a lot out of that. Um, besides avoid that path. But I haven't heard those stories yet.
yeah.
So I enjoy hearing wherever people are coming from, whether they're atheists or Catholic or Protestant,
But
you
what are
know.
the themes? What are the themes, like some of the major themes where you're delighted in listening to this fellow human being? Is it is it the discovery of God and that commitment, like a conversion moment? Are those the things that stand out for you, or what is it?
Well, I would say there's probably two things. One is just I think you're attracting a certain group of people who are interested in seeking the truth and reality. Um, Even if they're in different places, I think they do care about that, and I think they're also honest. Um, and so that's again, I feel like that is edifying to hear that, no matter where they're coming from. I feel like I find myself more at home with someone that's in a different church than I am, that is maybe even atheist, who is really concerned about seeking the truth more than they are about the next Marvel movie that's coming out, than I might in, say, uh like just a standard church, you know.
Yeah,
Um so I am encouraged by that. I think also another thing is to recognize Christ in people
mm,
that you interview.
mm,
And um and it's not just Protestants or it's not just Catholics, like
yeah,
it's like I can hear and recognize like God moving in people's lives in your interviews.
yeah,
Like there's one I remembered, I don't remember his name, but he was a Christian radio host for a bunch of years. Um and his take on things, like I was encouraged by that. Usually I don't agree with the guest in all the different way, in everything they say. Um, but I can definitely take away stuff from everybody.
yeah, yeah. So from what you said, what I'm getting is sincerity, authenticity, and a willingness to pursue the truth, and the beauty of seeing how we're all on a journey, and we're all I mean, ideally, we're all going to end up in heaven because we're all going to move towards the good, right? The good, the true, the beautiful. And it's exciting. And there's that ecumenical spirit, like true ecumenism for me is just that. It's understanding that God loves you, Christ died for you, and don't mean you, I mean every human being. Whoever I'm talking to, like God loves this person, loved them into existence, and Christ died for them. And some, obviously, some people don't know that yet, or they, they don't believe it, or whatever. But they're on a journey. Like I was atheist for 25 years, and you know, to the extent that you like me now, you would have liked me just as much when I was a Satanist. There's no difference. There's no difference. The only difference is now I've said yes to the graces, and I'm trying to cooperate with those graces, and I'm trying to sin less, obviously, to put it mildly. And I don't want to offend God. And it's from experience that it's very easy to say, but it's actually difficult because every moment of every day we have choices that we make, and those choices involve goods, It might be beer, like I'm having a alcohol-free beer here, and it might be food, like I like junk food, I like eating crappy food. It might be healthy food. It might be sleep, like I love sleeping. It's like, the saints, they talk about all of these things as being creatures. Sleep is a creature, food is a creature. Um, Even intimate, the marriage act, it's a creature. But it's all about having the priority with we love God first, and then we love neighbor for God's sake. And I keep saying it over and over again, but it's very easy to say that and to know that. But in the moment, I for myself, I will just readily admit, as I always do, that I'm very weak and I'm very selfish, and I don't like pain and I like pleasure, and I think that's why life is a real ordeal. It's a real challenge for the Christian. It's not an ordeal for the Satanist, because the Satanist just thinks that he can get away with it. He can have whatever pleasure he can get away with. There's still cops looking for criminals, so he has to be careful. If he's going to do something criminal, he has to be careful because he knows the cops out there, right? So, even the Satanist believes in cause and effect and consequences for our actions. But for the Christian, there's so much at stake. There's so much at stake. And in the Catholic faith, we talk about the four last things, which is death, judgment, and then heaven or hell. So to meditate on these constantly, it helps to inform our decisions that we make day to day. Does that resonate with your form of Christianity that you were raised with? The four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Is that something that you meditate on consciously, or is it just part of the fabric of your Christian
I
walk?
mean, it does resonate with me. I think that could be, I've experienced good expressions of that and terrible expressions of that. I think merely meditating on those things just without some further guides
Mm.
can lead you to some pretty dark places.
Mm.
So like my first year of college, um, like I stopped studying, I stopped eating, I stopped hanging out with people. I just was crazy depressed because I felt disconnected from God, lost, and that I was bound for hell. And so, I think like I can look back on the intensity of my commitment and thought at that time frame, but I think it was still misguided. I think like I was saying before, I think there needs to be more guide to that. And I'm not saying that you're saying that
Right, right,
there
right.
isn't,
Yeah, yeah,
but but I needed I think you need other Christians as part of your life, part of the body. I think just navigating those four questions on your own, again, you can end up in some pretty dark places, and God can snatch you out of that and rescue you in that, sure. But it's also helpful to have other people alongside you um, to say, those are big questions, and you can make some fallible conclusions about those questions and despair of life,
yeah,
or you might even have presumption and
yeah.
think, I'm going to heaven, I'm great, that there needs to be some humility involved in that process. And I think because you can look at that very clinically, you know, you can be the doctor who's diagnosing things. And even Paul says he's not going to be the diagnoser of his life. He leaves that in God's hands. So he says like he beats his body to make sure that he doesn't go astray. Paul was very like, he wanted to make sure that he didn't leave the path he should be on, but he also had this element of like really trusting God with those things and being able to leave that in God's hands. So for me, like my really dark times was when I took all of that on myself,
Yeah.
and I didn't know how to bring that to God and how to walk through that.
Do you remember when you got out of the hole, out of the dark hole? Do you remember
I think I'm still a little bit there.
that? Okay.
Um, but it was slow and over many years. A little bit was like meeting some friends and getting some connection with people, um, and just bringing the stuff to God over and over. This past year and a half, I've been going through the Psalms.
Okay.
As a family, we've been going through the Psalms, and I've always loved the Psalms,
Yeah.
but they've just really like been more meaningful to me this time around, and just realizing like that, like how important they are in the history of the church, you know, because they weren't a big part of our church liturgy, our church liturgy or anything. Um, but for monks praying the Psalms and for churches singing the Psalms over all the years. And so I just find them like really deep and meaningful. And I think they do a good job of balancing the considering the eternity and our existence, along with looking to God and, just bringing your whole self to God.
Yeah, the um what's it called? The hours, I forget what they call it in the Catholic Church, but
Yeah.
the priests have to do that every day, and it's got a lot of the Psalms in there. I think they go through the Psalms every like they just plow their way through on a schedule. Um but I wanted to ask you about the Psalms. Do you have any highlights, like not that you've like memorized them all, but I'm sure you have your favorite moments in the Psalms. My favorite Psalm, and the problem is the numbering, the two numbering systems that are off by one, right? So it's like Psalm 50 or 51, the penitential
Right.
prayer. The penitential prayer, Psalm 50 or 51. Do you know that one?
David's,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
after,
After his sin.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that one. I love, I think it's Psalm 85, if I'm not mistaken, where truth and justice kiss, or whatever the term is.
Mm,
There's some mention of that. That's not what he says, but something like that. It's got some beautiful imagery in there, and there are many psalms that have touched me in my faith journey. And it's just generally a place where you can go, like you were saying, you can go for strength or courage or inspiration for the battle, because it does talk a lot about our enemies. Very often in the Psalms, it will talk about our enemies, and we can have many different layers of meaning in the Psalms, but most often we can draw on a very spiritual interpretation for the spiritual battle, right? And
yeah.
so there's a lot to draw on there. But I'm just wondering if, off the top of your head, not to put you on the spot, but if there's some sort of highlights that come to mind for you in the Psalms, different moments there.
Yeah. I mean, there's tons. The Psalms are, there's probably, for me, as we were going through as a family, I would mark which ones like these are where I'm at now.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to think of probably were at least 15 different ones. Um, I had ended up praying fairly regularly between Psalm 32 and Psalm 103. And I think it might be Psalm 32 where there's a moment where God is speaking in the psalm
Okay.
and saying, like, I will guide you. I'll show you the way that you need to go in your life. I'll guide the steps of your life. But don't be like a stubborn horse or mule that needs a bit or bridle to guide it, or it won't go. So I'm encouraged by that and challenged by that, like encouraged that just that promise. Like, I don't know that I believe that all the time. It's good for me to hear that like that God is willing to and promising to guide the steps of my life. But then he also says, don't be like a stubborn mule. And then I usually end up praying, God, please give me a willing heart. I feel like a stubborn mule. So I think that's probably 32, but like I said, 32 and 103, I've kind of ping pong back and forth between those two.
Okay. And the beauty of the Christian mindset, or having the mind of Christ, is that suffering becomes currency. It becomes the most valuable thing, right? I mean, this is this the Catholics get a bad rap for this sort of attitude, but it's the most beautiful thing I think in Christianity is understanding that, suffering is evil. Yes, it is objectively. It's evil. It's a lack of health. It's a lack of integrity. But because of original sin, because the God man had to come and pay the price for us and to ransom us, because of that, there is a meaning to suffering. It's not meaningless as the atheist would believe, right? So the atheist just wants to minimize suffering, but the Christian also wants to minimize suffering, but because we cannot avoid it 100%, we cannot try it for one day and see how that goes. We cannot avoid it. We have, a certain joy and a certain peace in our suffering that's available to us. I'm not saying that I'm good at that. I'm not saying that you're good at that. I'm not saying that anyone I've met is good at that. But that is the goal. It is available to us. It's a treasure that is, I think, the secret really of the walk with Christ is to embrace suffering, not because it's good. It's not good. It's not good. What's good is health and pleasure and joy and all the things we're going to have in heaven. But given the fact that we've fallen in our first parents in the Garden of Eden, and there's original sin, and now there's actual sin. I actually sin. Sad to say. Given that, there are consequences, and we have the ability to have a meaningful life in this world, which is a fallen world. Yes, there's beauty here. It's ontologically good, but there is darkness, and Satan is the prince of this world. And like I talked about earlier, we talked about earlier with our own temptation in our inner life. There's darkness. There's darkness within us. Even St. Paul talks about this. That inner tension that we all have in this fallen world. So I think if we can tap into the power of Christ's redemptive suffering and death, and if we can participate in that just in a small way, God doesn't expect too much of us. He knows we're weak. He knows we're very selfish and we're very confused, and our intellects are dim and our wills are weak, and God knows that. He doesn't expect a lot from us, but when we make a little gesture of love, when we are patient, when we find ourselves inconvenienced, okay? Imagine that. So you're living your life and you're suddenly inconvenienced in a small way. Imagine if you understood the gesture of accepting that. There's no easy solution to this frustration. I'm stuck in traffic or whatever it is. Okay, can't find a parking spot. Whatever the frustration is. Imagine the power that would come from realizing that you are exactly where God wants you to be, and that this mild inconvenience, actually, you can please God by accepting it, by being patient, by not flipping the bird to your neighbor in the other car who cut you off or whatever. There's a treasure there. All day, every day, there's all this treasure. And you know how greedy we humans are, right? Like we should be fighting to, like we see illustrations of this in the Bible, Old and New Testament, where you see people scrambling to take the lowest place, and no, after you, no, you, and because this is the reality. If we can get into that mindset. But it sounds very cute when I talk about it, but then if you see me mildly inconvenienced, you see how annoyed I am, and I'm not taking advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, this is one of the blessings of being a father,
uh,
is you get to see the other side of that, to care about your kids, but also to understand that they need to go through difficulty to grow,
mm,
you know. I don't want pain for them, but I do, like they're gonna grow up soft and weak and
mm,
unable, if they don't. it's like any athlete also recognizes that,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
you're not going to be a great athlete if you don't
No pain, no gain.
subject yourself to pain.
No pain, no gain.
Yeah.
St. Paul does a wonderful job talking about that, illustrating that, and recounting his life, and just maybe you can tell me which part of which epistle he talks about all the trials and the shipwrecks and the being
Mm.
beaten half to death and all these sorts of things. Do you remember where that is? Where he recounts all
Um,
that?
I don't. I don't.
Okay. Okay. Doesn't really matter, right? We know you know what I'm talking about, right?
I do. Yeah, I'm familiar
It's
with that.
beautiful. It's one of my favorite passages in the Bible, because that is self-sacrificial love. Like, I mean, you remember, was it Jesus himself who told someone, "Oh, don't worry, I'm going to show Saul or Paul how much he must suffer." You know what I mean? I'm going
Oh
to
yeah.
show him, right? Was that Jesus talking to
I'm trying to think of. Yeah, I think it was Jesus to Paul
okay.
was
Okay.
saying like, "I'll show you how." Maybe Paul was recounting it. I think.
Okay. But it's
Yeah.
it's like pretty cut and dry. Like, I'm going to show you how much you have to suffer.
Yeah. And for Paul, it was a joy.
Yeah.
And like you recognize that when you fall in love with someone,
Yeah.
you're in
Yeah.
like to suffer for the person you you is a joy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So we need to embrace that. You and I need to embrace that. Every Christian needs to embrace that. And can you just imagine enjoying? And I do pray every day that I will be enabled by God's grace to enjoy everything that happens to me,
Mm.
provided that I don't do anything that offends God. So, like, I think that's the key. Those are the two sides of the coin. Like, I want to enjoy everything, including suffering, but I don't want to bring unnecessary suffering on myself and others by sinning, by offending God. And that's a constant danger, right? That's a constant danger, that it's like I'm going to offend God and then I'm going to pay the price sooner or later. Hopefully sooner, because it's like instant karma, get it over with. But a great saint that I love often talks about this, and I've mentioned it many times. Saint Alphonsus Liguori talks about the thing we should fear most about God in this fallen world is God's patience, because he's just stocking up and storing up, the wrath. And we don't often think about that, right? We don't think about that. Like, it's a very, very dangerous game to say, well, I got away with it 99 times. What's the 100th time going to be any different? I'm going to get away with it again, and you just flip the bird up to the big man in the sky because he doesn't exist, and da 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 da, and you Christians are crazy, and I've gotten away with it my whole life, and I'm going to keep getting away with it. Imagine, imagine that poor soul on Judgment Day if they haven't repented. It's devastating. And so this is, again, without getting too dark about the four last things, I mean, it is important. I think it is important to remember that God will not be mocked, right? Is that in the Psalms?
It's in the Bible somewhere.
So, yeah.
Yeah, a man reaps what he sows.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So what were some of these rabbit holes you wanted to go down before we wrap up here?
Well, probably like how I ended up on your channel
Yeah, okay.
was during COVID. I met some LDS Mormon missionaries,
Ooh.
and so
Oh.
got a chance to talk with them and do some exploration of my own to get to know where they were coming from.
Oh.
Better than I had growing up, better than the caricature I had.
Ah.
And so that's kind of started to open the doors for me to do the same for Catholicism,
Uh-huh.
Orthodoxy, even Protestantism. Even though I grew up in a Protestant church, we didn't really like have a great conception you know, of the history of it and the thinking behind it. So the past year and a half has kind of been a process of dialoguing with people and kind of looking into things to try and understand church history better. Um, And as a family, we started at the beginning of the new year, um, reading through the New Testament fresh, with some of these claims ringing in my head, kind of in the background, whether it's from the LDS Church or the Catholic Church or the Orthodox churches, or the like historic Protestant churches, kind of bringing some of those to the scriptures and reading to see, okay, what we have in the scriptures is a written representation of some of the apostolic teachings, right? To see how well those other conceptions, and even the ones I grew up with, align with um, that window into the first century that we have.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, right away I'm thinking about John 6 and you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood and all that sort of thing. Is that provided any sort of challenge to you or no? Not yet.
no, I don't think so.
Okay.
Um, I'm trying to look at it less. This little verse, this little
Right.
verse, this little verse
Right.
can make
Right.
a case,
Yeah.
and more to just let it speak as it was
Uh-huh.
written
Yeah.
and look at it as the big picture.
Yeah.
So, one thing I've been thinking this past year is I think I would like to emphasize, or be focused on the same things that those early Christians were focused on.
Okay.
So as much as that window, the New Testament, that window into that first century church presents an accurate picture, as much as it does that, like if I'm emphasizing something else that they aren't,
Yeah.
I want that to be like a pause for me.
Yeah.
Or if they're emphasizing something that I'm not, let's say they're emphasizing repentance,
Yeah.
but my theology just emphasizes like belief without repentance.
Yeah.
Like I want that to be a pause for me, you know.
Are there some
Uh,
things that are completely off the table? Like it's like, no, not going to revisit that. I'm done with that. I'm judging that as wrong. For example, the Calvinists with double predestination or something. You just like, no, I'm done. I'm not going to go and revisit that. I know it's wrong. Or things like, um, real presence in the Eucharist. Like you're just like, no, I'm not going to even look into it anymore. I'm done with that. Are there some things that are off the table because you've come to a solid conclusion?
um, well, I would say no, nothing's off the table. Even things, I mean, this might be scary for people I grew up with or even myself, but like even things like the Trinity,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
Um, but I also would say I'm not reading it through a theological lens.
yeah,
I think we tend to read the New Testament through a theological lens or through our own church experience, reading it back onto the texts.
yeah.
And the New Testament, for the most part, wasn't written as a theological treatise. I would say like Romans is very theological. It kind of is. The book of Hebrews also, John strays into those areas in a different way. But for the most part, like, I don't think that window is like, I don't see that as a theological book. I don't see the Bible as a theological book.
Have you?
I think it's,
Yeah, go
yeah, go
ahead.
ahead.
Well, I was just going to
Uh,
ask you, have you studied philosophy at all?
Not much. In this past year and a half, I've just started to learn to see some value in philosophy, and like through listening to through your podcast and a few other people, to begin to understand what some of those questions are in philosophy.
Well, because the reason I'm asking, because it sounds like the approach you're taking to Christianity and in particular to the New Testament is a phenomenological approach where it's just like you are just trying to bracket it just like with no preconceived judgments or biases to the extent that's possible. But
Right.
that's the effort, and it's sort of like also like an existential sort of approach where you're just confronting in a raw way the reality of the New Testament. And I I happen to be sympathetic to those schools of philosophy, and it's sort of like a cleaning house. And if you know my story, how I came to God as at age 39 in 2009, how I came to God was through radical doubt. I doubted everything that was possible to doubt. And you've probably heard me say it a million times, but my faith in God is real supernatural faith, but I don't need faith to know that God is real. It's a philosophical reality. And so I'm not too worried, frankly, about the Trinity, the Incarnation, and all the specific faith-based beliefs of Christianity. I'm not worried about it. I'm also, very secure that Christianity is true, God's a Trinity, and I'm also very secure that I'll never understand that, and I'll never understand the mystery of God, full stop. Much less the Trinity and the mysteries of our faith, of our precious faith. We can dive into it in all eternity. That's what heaven is. We're going to experience it in a way that is very fulfilling without actually becoming part of the Godhead, but we'll have a participation in the Godhead. So there, I'm not worried about my little brain being able to wrap around mysteries that our minds were not made to wrap around here below. But I'm very secure that Christianity is true, but I'm also not worried about it. I'm not worried about, like, oh, I really hope it's true, and if it's not, my world's gonna crumble. No, I'm completely secure in God the Father. And that's why Saint Philip is one of my favorite apostles. He's like, just show us the Father. That's all we want. That's all we want. And Christ obliged him. He said, yeah, that's what it's all about. And if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And it's just like, don't how stupid are you? Don't get it yet? You've been with me all these years. So I do not want to contradict Christ or his church. And for me, the church is the Catholic Church. That's the fullness of Christianity. I'm not going to go contradicting the dogmas of the Catholic Church, not even close. But I'm also aware that, the theology and the dogmas, even the dogmas themselves, to the extent that the dogma teaches a mystery, there's a lot more to it than just, what the paragraph that I read in a summary volume like this. There's a lot more to it. It's more real. It's not less real. It's more real. It's more mysterious, and it's a person, and the person is always mysterious. Even a human person is mysterious. So all of this to say that I'm very secure in my Christianity. I believe it's true. I'm not laying awake worrying about it. But if it's, if we've failed to grasp some nuance of theology or whatever, it really doesn't matter, because we have God the Father. And you on your journey, and your authentic and sincere journey to be a better Christian, which is, I think, how I would characterize what you're going through, like striving to be a better Christian. It's rooted, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say it's rooted in God the Father. And if you're open to the possibility that you haven't yet grasped the Trinity, or you don't comprehensively understand it, or you're open to learning through your phenomenological or existential confrontation with the Word, you're open to whatever, I would say that's good, and that's what children do. Children are open. And there's no danger. Like, there is no danger. Now, if you're like me, you're a Catholic that believes in dogmas that cannot be questioned, and these are God-given eternal truths, and they're not up for discussion, then you're going to have to be very careful about how you investigate, right? And you have to, even you as a non-Catholic, you have to treat with respect the tradition that you come from, and the tradition of, you mentioned, the whole history of the church going back to the apostles. Like, there's a history there, and you have to have respect for the Christians that came before you, the great Christians. And your list of great Christians, my list of great Christians, they might have some differences, but I'm sure there's a lot of overlap too, right? So all of this to say that I encourage you to continue exploring. And I think people get uptight with the rigorism about, like, I found the truth, and these are the These are the rules, and this is the list of things and dogmas and whatever. And our current Pope, Pope Francis, he's very controversial. A lot of people don't like him, especially the Catholics, but conservative Catholics, so called. But he emphasizes this warm relationship style of Christianity over against a rigorism, a legalism, Pharisaical nonsense, right? Which is basically demonic. So I agree with him. I agree with him 100%. But, like we said at the very beginning of this interview, religion is just a lot easier than faith in having that relationship. So,
Yeah, definitely. Because religion it's like what I can do. I can study, I can read the Psalms, I can look into which church is true or not church or true. I can read the New Testament, I can attend a certain congregation and go through certain activities. But a relationship with God requires it's like, am I right with him? Are things kosher between us? It's like a marriage, you know, it's a lot more difficult, and it might require for me to have to face up to some difficult things in my own life.
yeah, in my interview last night with this great Catholic gentleman who puts together some good content for us Catholics, um, I mentioned something. I want to just bounce the idea off you, see what you think, because it seems relevant. It's this idea of human respect, where, and it's a sin in our understanding, our Catholic understanding. It's a sin, human respect, where you betray God for the sake of pleasing your neighbor or your wife or whatever, right? So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that, and I admire you. I mean, I don't know you very deeply, but just having this conversation, it seems that you are free, perhaps in a way that a lot of Christians aren't, and that is because perhaps you're more disinterested in your pursuit of truth. And this is not to put anyone down who, that I'm contrasting you with. Everyone's on their own journey, as you know. But the exciting thing is when you embrace the freedom that is in Christ. And it's like we said, it's dangerous, but the openness, when you really are questioning for authentic reasons, and it's not just a rebellion, like I want some space to sin, so I'm gonna push back, to create this false space, knowing full well, that I'm rejecting truth just to make space for sin. No, I don't think that's what you're doing, and God forbid. But there's a sort of what I would say I recognize in you, I hope, is a sort of a freedom from that human respect element, which keeps a lot of people trapped in a false religion or a false worldview because they don't want to upset their mother. I mean, what did Jesus say about, hating your mother, your brother, your sister, and even your own very self? It's a detachment. It's a form of detachment, which is not detachment for detachment's sake. It's detaching from the creature in order to fulfill the first commandment, to put God first and to love him with your whole heart, strength, mind, and whatever. So that's the end of my little rant there. I'll let you respond to it, and then we're going to wrap it up here soon. But
Well, I'm definitely not free from that. Maybe in some ways more than I was in the past. And I think as Christians, sometimes we're maybe scared to rigorously pursue the truth. We're afraid that we'll find God isn't there at the end of that road. Um, but I mean, the scriptures themselves encourage us to rigorously pursue the truth. If there isn't God at the end of that road, um, we should find that out as Christians. That's what we're called to do.
yeah, but
Um,
do you share my certainty, my philosophical certainty in God the Father? Do you share that, or is it still something you haven't really examined the foundations of your faith the way that I have?
uh, Not in the same ways. Yeah, I think some days more so than others. I think a few things that root and ground me these days, because I'm kind of rocky sometimes in that department, are seeing God work in my life a few times recently, very specifically. and then also um just experiencing the world around me, you know. My thoughts recently have been like when you see a sunset. I mean, you can say it's all an accident, but that seems rather absurd if you're actually living in that moment and experiencing that moment. I tell people, if you don't believe in God, you need to eat better tacos. Because if you have an amazing Mexican taco, like from Mexico, with heirloom corn tortilla, amazing meat and toppings and salsa, that was made with love and care, and you eat that and you come away with thinking, this is an accident. The person who made it was an accident. This whole culture is just an accident. I'm just moving molecules from one place to another. You're missing what's happening.
Oh yeah. The
You're
re
experiencing a miracle.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I I've already admitted to you that I love food. I love the pleasure of food. But honest to God, it's one of the best witnesses to the reality of God and the mercy and the goodness of God is some of the food that I eat. It's just amazing. It's amazing. Like one of them that I'm always like praising and thanking God is when I eat a red grapefruit that's really spot on. There's
Mm.
something about that just I just like it's just amazing to me. I don't know why. No other fruit does it for me, but the red grapefruit. And I don't eat red grapefruit all the time. Like, I mean, I have these amazing experiences, but it has to be, I just leave it to Providence, like when I get a red grapefruit or whatever. But, I'm not like stockpiling them and eating them, gorging myself on them. But there's some other very, 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 very simple foods. One of them is when I just happen to prepare my simple, I'm not vegetarian, but I eat a lot of vegetarian food. So it's just like rice and vegetables. So one of the foods that makes me worship God really hard is it's like jasmine rice with broccoli and just a few like spices, whatever. No garlic and onion. I don't do garlic and onion. But honestly, like it almost brings tears to my eyes. Like when I do a good job, because I'm the cook at home, I do all the cooking. So when I do a good job and it's just right and I'm eating it, it's just like it's one of the most pure forms of praise that I've ever experienced. Where I'm just like, thank you, God, this is amazing, you know, and that's encouraging to me that I have that in me. And like you were saying, well, maybe some people they don't experience that, like they don't get it, like they don't feel that, like what, like there's no appreciation, like they're not transported, they're not singing God's praises, like what's going on, are these people dead, like what's going on? So it's
Yeah.
encouraging to me that I have that in me, and I'm sure that that's encouraging for you too, that you feel like you're connecting, and even though it's something
Yeah.
that's
I
so
mean,
trivial.
when you see, like a young child being born, when you see a sunset,
Yeah.
when you eat an amazing taco, when you hear a Bach song,
Yeah.
to come away with that this is just all accidents and I'm just an accident experiencing accidents. Yeah, it's a blindness, it's an absurdity. Like I'm willing to listen to your argument for why you think it's that way, but you better have a very good argument. Um, because I've
Well, I think it was C.S. Lewis who made an argument from aesthetics or something like that. Oh no, it was an argument from, I guess, from basic desire, argument from desire, if I'm not mistaken.
mm,
So like we're hungry, so there's food, and we're thirsty, and there's water, and we crave the eternal, and there's the eternal. Like we one of my favorite gotchas on the atheist is like if you could prolong your life by 5 minutes, but it's 5 minutes pain free and your most like brilliant self-indulgent fantasy. Like usually I use the example of like either spending time with a loved one that was deceased or eating an ice cream cone or something, whatever they think is really fun and pleasurable. And would you want to extend your life by 5 minutes and just enjoy this thing, whatever you want, right? Like a little taste of heaven or whatever. And usually they say, yeah, why not? Right? It doesn't cost me anything. It's like just 5 minutes of pleasure. Why not? But these same atheists will rail against the idea of heaven because it's too good, it's too long, it's too what? Like what? Why? Like you just told me you want 5 minutes. If I added another 5 minutes, you'll say yes. If I add another hour, another day, another week, another month, you're always going to say yes. But eternity is too much. You're going to get bored. Like suddenly, like you're crushed by the boredom of heaven. But you just told me that you like every 5 minute portion of heaven, but you don't like the whole thing. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Oh, my friend Nicola Chrisix in the live chat says, "Praise be Jesus Christ. Hello, boys. Question: maybe he has a healthy doubt and feeling guilty about it." So he's wondering, my friend Nicola's wondering if maybe you have a healthy doubt, but you're uncomfortable with it. I don't know where he got that, maybe from listening to when you were talking about it. Is that something you've considered?
Yeah, that could be, because I think we are supposed to have a healthy doubt. I don't think atheism is actually the enemy to Christianity. The scriptures have Ecclesiastes in them. They have the Psalms in them. Moments where you're saying, "Where are you, God?" Moments at looking at the difficulty, where it seems like God is completely absent. My existence is without tacos and sunsets. It's, or doubting like Thomas, being very, how do we make sense of this whole thing? Like Israel in the desert, God did an amazing thing. And now here I am just out in the middle of the desert eating crappy food, So, so I don't think that's foreign to the human existence and the Christian existence.
Do you feel like you understand Christ's final moments on the cross when he said, "Why have you abandoned me?" Do you understand that? Do you have a unique understanding of that, or do you just sort of know the textbook versions, or
Maybe a little bit experientially. I think a lot of times I'm asking the question the other way around.
why have I
God, why have I
abandoned you?
abandoned you? Yeah.
Well, that's easy because you're lazy and you're selfish. That's easy.
Yeah. There you go.
You don't need God for that one. Just phone me up and I'll tell you why.
But sometimes it does feel like God disappeared, like
uh,
one day he was in the sky, like, or just like the friend right next to me. And then the other day I'm just completely alone. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think if you're open to reading the great saints, um, you know, you'll sympathize with the um, desolation, I guess it's called desolation,
mm,
moments of desolation, sometimes days or weeks or months or even years of desolation. I don't know what you think of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, but I really like her and I admire her, and she was an Albanian woman, and my friend in the chat, Nicola Krisic's Albanian. And, you know, she apparently went through some very, very dry years. I don't know how many, many, many years, I think. And often I think about our relationship with God in terms of just a very simple question. Like Christ asked St. Peter, like, "Do you love me? Do you
mm.
love me? Like, how about now? Do you still love me?" You know what I mean? And it's annoying. It's annoying. Peter was annoyed and he was frustrated. And yes, of course, you know everything. You know I love you. But behind that simple question is, not a condemnation, but an expose. You're being exposed.
Mhm.
You're being exposed because God knows and you know the extent of your love for Him. God knows and you know. The people around you don't know. They don't know.
Right.
They
And
might have
Peter
some
went,
idea, but
yeah, and Peter went from being very confident, like, you know, I'm willing to die with you.
yeah,
I'm the greatest Christian, like, to flat on his face.
Have you heard the tradition about his face having grooves from the tears? Have you heard that before?
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
Just because, do you remember when Jesus looked at him when the cock crowed and he denied whatever? And just the look, the look that Jesus gave to Peter is a knowing look. And it's just like, you and I know, we know how, the extent to which you love me. And it's it's easy to read stories like that in the New Testament and just turn the page and read the next story. It's just full of stories, right? It's very easy, it's familiar, and yeah, have you read this? Yeah, I've read it 100 times. It's easy, and what's difficult is to spend time with it. And I don't do this. I mean, I've gone through periods with diving heavily into the Bible and neglecting the Bible and whatever, and um, you know, I'm not trying to set myself as any kind of example as a Christian with the relationship with the Bible, but there's so much in there. It's so rich and so powerful, and it can be a great fuel for our faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just a little thing like that, just that look exchanged between Christ and Peter at that moment, and it's so relatable. It's so relatable.
Well, and it's I've been reflecting upon recently, like the difference between Judas and Peter. You know, um,
Uh,
like both went way off where they should have been.
yeah.
Both realized it,
Uh,
but then it's how did each man approach it?
yeah.
Um,
You have any
like
hope
one
for
man.
Judas? You have any hope for Judas that he repented? Because it says that in one of the Gospels that he repented.
Yeah, I don't know what was meant. I'd have to, look
Yeah.
into
Do you have a
what
hunch
the
though? Do you have a
language.
hunch? Do you feel like he's damned, or do you feel like there's hope?
Um, I would just say that I don't know.
Okay. Would you have a
I can,
preference? Do you have any preference?
obviously my preference would be that he's saved.
Yeah.
But I think it is like it's a picture of someone that just despaired
Yeah.
of their wrongdoing, you know, versus Peter. Peter was willing to be brought back. His despair pointed in a different direction.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, I think we probably all experience both paths in our lives,
Yeah.
where it's just we're only looking at how terrible we've been and we despair and we want to go hang ourselves in a field, you know, versus Peter who like hang out, stick around, don't give up, make that space for God to restore you. Um,
Yeah. And don't take yourself so seriously, and don't be obsessed
mm,
with yourself. Don't be self-centered.
right.
Be God-centered, not self-centered, right?
Yep.
And again, it's very easy for me to say, and don't expect me to live up to those words. But I know that's the trick. Don't be
Yeah.
self-centered, be God-centered. But I often think about what Christ said to that young man who was very virtuous and kept all the commandments his whole life long, and to be perfect. And someone said, I don't know if he said it or if someone said that it's impossible, and Jesus said, yeah, it is impossible for men, but not for God.
Mm,
That's powerful. That's very powerful. That's the mystical key to the walk with Christ, and it ties in with what I'm saying about don't be self-centered, be Christ-centered, and no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That's where the miracles come from. That's where the joy comes from. That's where the endurance comes from, and long suffering and everything else, right?
mm.
But we choose. Why do we choose to be self-centered? Why? Why? We know that's not the answer. We know that's the wrong answer, right? Why do we do it? Why? I'm asking you. Tell me.
Well, I think we know. I don't know. I just think we know better, and whenever we get a chance to take the reins to drive the
Let
bus,
me
I
try.
think
Let me
we
try. Let me do it my way. This time it might work out. Didn't
that's
work out.
right.
Never
Yeah.
worked out before, but it might
Yeah.
work out this time.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. Do you think about the patience of God? I mean, we talked about the patience of God, but do you think about how gentle and patient he is with every one of his human creatures? Like, um, it's mind blowing, really, because I converted it as an adult, right? You've been on board pretty much the whole time, but since your teen years, but I went very far astray, and I came back, and you know, the gentleness and the silence of God. Like if I were God, I would have had some choice words for me. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Some
Yeah.
real daggers, like just like twist the knife just to let you know I know what you did. I know you know I. But none of that. None of that.
Yeah, I think I'm not good at grasping that. What helps me is when I think about my best days as a father, when I'm actually patient with my kids and caring for them and seeing them in their struggle, in their guilt, in their like whatever difficult thing in their fear, and to be like, I'm here with you until you get through it, and you may not be able to hear me or understand me, you're so freaked out. Um, but I'm just going to stay here until you're able to hear and listen and calm down. On like my best days when that happens, which isn't a lot, but when it does happen, to reflect on that. I mean, Jesus says that, like, if you're a good parent and you're willing to give good gifts to your kids, your Father in heaven is a better parent than you are. And he wants to just, he wants to bless you with such wonderful goodness. Um, and he's patient.
That's one of my favorite lines. Also, uh, it's amazing. It's just really amazing. So I really appreciate meeting you. I hope you're going to come back often and talk to me about your ongoing journey. And I hope you're going to pray for me. I enroll all my guests in a perpetual mass, as you probably know. So the graces of the holy sacrifice of the mass are going to be flooding you and your family until the end of time. And I hope you keep in touch, and I'll probably see you in the comment section like usual. But even if not, just reach out whenever you want to talk. Or did you use the Calendly app to book this? I think you
Yeah,
did.
I
I
think
think you
so.
did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to use, right? You just go and look at the available slots and
Yep.
pick one, whatever. So that's come in handy. I'm getting more and more guests now because of that. So I don't have to like try to negotiate time because I work full time during the week. So that's pretty handy. So you have an open invitation. Just come back whenever you feel like talking about Christ, and if you want to dig deeper into certain topics or whatever, like today was getting to know you and just as usual just freestyle conversation. But if you do want to dig into anything that has anything to do with philosophy or religion, uh the door is always open, so I hope you'll come back.
Yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed the conversation, and I feel like, I mean, I've gotten a chance to hear a bunch from you for hours and hours and
Yeah.
hours as I'm
Yeah.
falling in sleep at night. So, but it's been nice to talk back and forth.
Yeah.
And I am most interested to talk about, like, what is this Christian journey
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
in the mere sense, as
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis
Yeah.
says.
Yeah.
For me, that's scriptures say the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. And so that's the meaningful part for
Yeah. Yeah.
me. So one of these days maybe we could talk about Catholic Protestant stuff. Honestly, like that's more maybe interesting intellectually, but that's not the core of the story for me.
Yeah. Don't try to think, oh, what would David want to talk about? No, as you know, I'm interested in the guest, where the guest is at, what the guest is like. You know,
Well, yeah, I do think about that stuff. So I would find it interesting to
yeah,
talk about. But like I said, it's not the heart.
the heart. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because well, as you know from listening to different guests, everyone has a different emphasis, and that emphasis changes over time. But one of the things that I like to emphasize with my podcast is discovering, or even helping people to discover for the first time, where they place the emphasis, because sometimes it's an unthinking thing, and then when you realize, wow, I'm placing a lot of emphasis on this, that's good, or maybe it's not good because I'm neglecting to put emphasis elsewhere. And I think about this myself, in my own journey, and I do get I do get criticism from people that know me, about how I'm overemphasizing this or not, neglecting that. And I just did want to, before we wrap up here, I did want to say to you that I hope that you understand that I mean no disrespect when I'm flippant and very, how should I say, cavalier, I guess, with my complacent attitude in my Catholicism. There's no disrespect intended. I hope that I don't come across as some sort of smug a-hole like a lot of people think that I am. And I hope you know that I consider you my brother in Christ, and I was born and raised Protestant, and because I'm aware of the fact that I'm very sloppy and loose with my tongue, and Saint James in his epistle talks about that, right? A little fire, it's hard to control the tongue and whatever. So I'm very aware of that, and I'm not trying to control myself too much. I like to be loose, and I would rather make a mistake and apologize or be corrected, or say something wrong and then fix it, or be imprecise with my language and then someone can ask for clarification. I like to err on that side rather than being really controlled and uptight and like I've got my thesis and this is my argument and I'm never going to stray from this because I've found the solution. No, I'd rather play, I'd rather be loose, and frankly, I'd rather allow myself to be wrong, and even to risk possibly saying too much at times. So
Yeah. Yeah. I I understand that.
because I'm just thinking, because you're such a nice guy and you're taking the time to listen to my podcast, and I'm sort of cringing thinking about, oh my God, like I'm such an idiot. I'm such an idiot. So I guess I shouldn't worry
No,
about it.
I mean, you're human just like all the rest of us. And I value like sincere, clumsy conversation over just like rigid, formal, don't go
Polished.
outside the boundaries.
Yeah.
That's lifeless to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting meeting you, and hope you come back soon. And do please remember me and mine in your prayers. Next time we
Yeah,
talk,
I'll pray for you guys.
I'm gonna make a note. Next time we talk, I'm gonna make a note. I have to wrap it up here, but next time we talk, I'm gonna ask you about your prayer life and what you're working on in terms of modifying your prayer life, because one of the most fascinating parts of the Christian life.
Sounds
So
good.
so think about that, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right, I'll pray for you
Take
guys.
good care.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Adios.